Hello and good morning to you all. I am going to go through some more chapters in Genesis today, but this is something that has been on my mind since I went through the last chapters in Isaiah. And I ended with chapter 37. Pretty sure I did. Chapter 38. I went through chapter 38 in Isaiah. And when I got to chapter 37, I was like, whoa, kind of a little bit of a template, similar language going on, similar situation going on as in Ezekiel 38 and 39 with Gog and Magog. This was kind of fascinating to me. So for those of you who did not check that video out, I am going through the book of Isaiah right now, and I've gotten through chapter 38. So in the last video that I did, I went through, I think, chapters like 35 through 38. And we're talking about going back. We moved from a prophetic perspective in that book to the historical perspective. What was going on literally at that time in history when Isaiah was writing that book. And this takes us back to the days of King Hezekiah and the Assyrians. This just to give you a little bit of background about the situation as we've been studying it out. In the beginning of Isaiah, we are circa 720, 722-ish BC, when the Assyrian captivity occurred. The Assyrians came and took captive the house of Israel. And that is the last time that you see the house of Israel produce a kingship. After King Solomon, for those of you who might not know, after King Solomon, his sons Jeroboam and Rehoboam, the kingdom split. It was divided between Solomon's two sons. There was the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, and the southern kingdom, the house of Judah. And they obviously each had their own separate lines of kings and all of that. So the Assyrian captivity that occurred, again, circa 720, 722 BC, took captive the house of Israel. And there was never a king that came from the house of Israel after that. The house of Judah was spared. There was a remnant from Judah that was preserved. And that was part of God's faithfulness toward the house of Judah. Specifically because Jesus was going to come through the tribe of Judah. So there's some other circumstances regarding that. But the kings from Judah were not taken. It was the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian captivity, which included the destruction of Solomon's temple and the sacking of Jerusalem in 586 BC. That was when the house of the house of Judah ceased to produce kings. So the house of Israel, that happened back in 722-ish. House of Judah didn't happen until the Babylonian captivity. So the Assyrians took away the house of Israel, and the Babylonians took away the house of Judah. So before all of that happened, we're about 700 BC in Isaiah 37 with King Hezekiah. And there's another attempt by the Assyrians, who were successful against the house of Israel already like 20 years before this. There is another attempt by the Assyrians to take captive the house of Judah. And Hezekiah is imploring the Lord to not allow this to happen. And God says, I will not allow this to happen. And so you see the historical aspect of this playing out in these chapters of Isaiah, beginning in chapter, I believe it's 36. Yes, chapter 36 and 37 is where this story comes from. That when you look at some of the language presented in Ezekiel 38 and 39 about Gog and Magog and this battle, this invasion, down to the language of putting hooks in jaws and bringing them to a specific place in order to achieve a specific outcome, which is God decimating them and killing the leadership. Like literally, if you take Sennacherib, who was the king of Assyria at this time, and put him next to Gog, you basically have like very, very similar situations. So I kind of want to read this this chapter again, and hopefully you guys are familiar with Ezekiel 38, and you can kind of just keep that in the back of your minds as we read through this, and you can see the very similar situation. Now, the Assyrians were a godless people, and there There is language in here about Egypt, the gods of Egypt. And when we hopefully at some point in the future, I'll be able to finish Genesis and move into Exodus. But when you go to Exodus and the actual story of the Exodus in Genesis 12, 13, Exodus 13, 14, 15, when God is demonstrating his sovereignty over the little g gods of Egypt, he's basically saving Israel in front of their faces. And this same story is or the same situation is kind of brought into focus with the Assyrians and their gods. Basically, there's this guy who is in front of Hezekiah and in front of all of Israel saying, your God's not going to save you. Your God is weak. Your God isn't anything. Don't listen to Hezekiah. He's telling you your God's going to save you. Your God's not going to save you. You're all going to die unless you do what we say, unless you pronounce fealty to the Assyrians and all of this. And so God's like, yeah, I'm just going to show you. I mean, that's what Hezekiah asked him to do. And so there's story, there's there's references here to the gods of Egypt. And that's kind of what that goes back to, is the actual Exodus from Egypt. And in front of the little g gods of Egypt, God demonstrated himself mighty for the sake of Israel. And that's exactly what God is doing in front of the Assyrians, is demonstrating himself mighty on behalf of Israel in front of the little g gods of Assyria. Hi, look up, welcome. Kind of like God showing precedence for what he will do with Gog. Yeah, and so hopefully that brings a little bit more clarity to the conversation, in case you guys were wondering what I'm talking about. So that's the historical aspect. And the chapter 36, Isaiah 36, is where it kind of starts with the, hey, don't listen to Hezekiah, your God's not going to save you type thing. He says, thus saith the king, and this is of the Assyrians. He's the mouthpiece of the king of Assyria, telling Israel not to listen to Hezekiah, their king, and not to think that their God's going to save them. Let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. The city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. So he's like, don't listen to Hezekiah. We're going to come and we're going to take over, and nothing you or your God is going to say or do is going to stop us. He says, hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, eat ye every one of his vine, and every one of you his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters out of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. So he's making the Assyrian captivity sound like a walk in the park. No. He says, beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Hath any of the gods, little g gods of the nations, delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? And this is the Assyrian Empire, who had invaded and destroyed many countries before this. So they come to Judah, and they're trying to do the same thing. He's like, we have this precedent behind us. And what do you guys think? You're just going to get lucky or something? No. He says, where are the gods of Harmath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Samaria was the capital of the house of Israel. And again, 20 years prior to this point is when they went into captivity and the kingship ceased from the house of Israel. So he's like, all these other people thought that they could stop us, and none of them did. Where are their gods now? Who are they among all the gods of the land that have delivered their land out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? So all these other countries had their little g gods, and none of them did anything. And you think your Lord is going to deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? But they held their peace and answered him not a word, for the king's commandment was saying, answer him not. So Hezekiah is like, don't even entertain this guy. Then came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes and their clothes rent, and told him the words of this mouthpiece of the king of Assyria. So that's kind of how it sets up. You have the house of Israel, who already was taken into captivity by these Assyrians 20 years prior, and you have all these other countries that the Assyrians have essentially laid waste to. And they're using this as their soapbox to say, look at what we've done. No one else has stopped us, and you think you're going to? No, you're not. So just give us what we want and let us take you captive and let us steal your land and stuff. That's basically what they're saying. So this is where we get to chapter 37. It came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. He sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the scribe with the elders of the priests covered with sackcloth unto Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. And this is the book of Isaiah. They said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke, and of blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord thy God will hear the words of this Assyrian guy, whom the king of Assyria, his master, has sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words of the Lord thy God, which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left. So there were some cities in the house of Judah that were taken captive. Essentially, you're looking at a remnant scenario, is that the house of Assyria is trying to take all of the house of Judah captive, and God will preserve a remnant according to the election of grace. And that's what it's looking at, the remnant that is left. That's what that is a reference to. They've already taken some defensed cities from the house of Judah, and now they're trying to take Jerusalem itself. And this God will not allow. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say unto your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him. He shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. And so this is just like the prophecy against Gog. In Ezekiel 38, God says to Ezekiel, prophesy against Gog, the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and tell him, this is what I'm going to do to him. And so this is exactly what Isaiah is prophesying to Hezekiah, saying, okay, the king of Assyria, this is what I'm going to do to him. And then he follows through on it. So this Assyrian guy returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And he heard saying concerning the king of Ethiopia, he has come forth to make war with thee. When he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceiveth thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the king of Assyria has done to all lands by destroying them utterly. And shalt thou be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, which my fathers have destroyed? And then he lists a whole bunch of places. Where is the king? And he said, where are all these kings of these cities? Well, they're destroyed because the Assyrians destroyed them. Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up unto the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed unto the Lord, saying, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone. Of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou hast made heaven and earth. Incline thine ear, O Lord, and hear. Open thine eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which hast sent to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their countries, and have cast their little g gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. Now, therefore, O Lord, our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only. Then Isaiah, the son of Amos, said unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, whereas thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word which the Lord hath spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee and laughed thee to scorn. The daughters of Jerusalem have shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel? By thy servants hast thou reproached the Lord, and hast said, By the multitude of my chariots am I come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon. I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice firs thereof, and I will enter into the height of his border and the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk water with the sole of my feet. I have dried up the rivers of the besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now I have brought it to pass that thou shouldest be to lay waste defense cities into ruinous heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, as the herb, the green herb, as the grass on the housetop, and as the corn blasted before it be grown up. So basically, all of these things have happened to leave Israel in a spot where she is unable to defend herself against the Assyrian army. And this is another similarity, Gog and Magog. Israel is all alone, no one to help her. There's this army that comes like a cloud to cover the land for the purpose of spoiling Israel. And all anyone else does is just ask, is that what you're coming to do, to take the spoil? Israel has no defense against the multitude of this army. And so the only person that can help her is God. God has created this scenario that will glorify him, that will have everyone on the world stage looking to him as the only one who could solve this problem. And that is what he will do. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, it's the same purpose, that the only one who can save Israel is God. And he will do so. But I know thy abode, and thy going in, thy coming out, and thy rage against me. Because thy rage against me, and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore I will put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way which thou camest. So this is the first thing that drew my attention to this being similar to Gog and Magog, is God said, he's prophesying against Sennacherib, but saying, nope, I'm going to turn you around. You're not coming to Jerusalem. I'm going to turn you around, send you back where you came. And when you get there, you're going to be killed. And this is the same thing. So he's turning them away from Israel at that point. Now in Ezekiel 38 and 39, he's turning them toward Israel so that he can act on Israel's behalf on the world stage when no one else can help Israel, and Israel also cannot help herself. So you have the same outcome here as Israel being saved. In Sennacherib's case, the Assyrians, he's being turned away from Israel and sent back to where he came from, and then he's going to be killed by a sword once he gets there. So he's going away. And then on the opposite side of that, you have God, who he's going to put a hook in his jaw and bring him forth, him and all of his bands, and make an example of him in front of everyone on the world stage to let everyone know primarily that the heathen may know him, and that Israel understands that their God exists. So it's basically God is entering world stage in Ezekiel 38 and 39 for what will be an entirely supernatural period of time from that point forward. And in Isaiah, he's turning them away from Jerusalem and still killing the army that is seeking to come against the house of Judah. And God said, no, these are my people, this is my city, and I'm not going to let you do it. Verse 30 of Isaiah 37, this shall be the sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, and the second year which springeth of the same, and the third year sow ye and reap the plant vineyards and eat the fruit thereof. So he's giving Hezekiah a sign that lets him know, when you see this was me. The remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. So he's going to plant them in the land, and they're not going anywhere. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of the hosts shall do this. Therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come down to the city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into the city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. Because Israel and Jerusalem is his. It is his possession. Then, so how did God kill Gog and Gog's army? The swords would be against their own brother. He would turn every brother's sword against their own, and he would plead with them 6 different ways, with pestilence and with fire, with overflowing rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. He's going to kill the entire army in 6 different ways. And that was them coming against the mountains of Jerusalem. So they die there, and then they're going to be buried and weapons burned and all of that stuff in Ezekiel. So how does he act in Isaiah 37 regarding Sennacherib's army, the Assyrian army, because he already sent Sennacherib back and said, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and take you away from Jerusalem, send you back from where you came, and you're going to die there. But what about the rest of the army? Then the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. He killed them. The angel of the Lord, 185,000 soldiers died. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. That's what he did. He killed them all, just like he's going to do in Ezekiel 38 and 39 to the entirety of the army that comes against Israel. He's going to kill them. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sherazar, his son, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and his son reigned in his stead. So I just thought that was interesting, the similarities between the Assyrian army, and Sennacherib, and God putting the hooks in the jaw and saving Israel. It's very similar situation in Isaiah 36 and 37 to Ezekiel 38 and 39. So I just thought that I would share that. It's been on my mind since I went through that chapter. That was very similar. And so never fear, God's got Israel's back. So have a great day, and I'll be back in the near future to go through more chapters in Genesis. I'll see you guys later.